This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. If you love brewing as much as we do and are inspired by the work of leading commercial brewers like Mitch Steele of New Realm, Tommy Arthur of Lost Abbey, Matt Brindleson of Firestone Walker, Jeff Stuffings and Avery Swanson of Jester King, Jason Perkins of Allagash, and more, then put one of our 2018 Brewers Retreat events on your calendar. These luxury brewing events at gorgeous resort locations around the country pair great brewers, great food, and intimate camaraderie for a truly unique and unforgettable experience. Learn more at brewersretreat.com. And if you're interested in reaching the thousands of listeners who tune into every episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, we'd love to welcome you as a sponsor. For more information, drop an email to info@beerandbrewing.com, and our media sales team will craft a plan that works for you. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest today is Nick Nunns, the founder of True Brewing here in Denver, Colorado. We're sitting in the front of their tap room before they open here on a Wednesday afternoon. The brewery, brew house tap room here, if you haven't seen it, is a temple to all things metal. Dark and brooding, black and white photos lining the walls. Skulls behind the bars, and in a bit of an intimidating space. But I'll tell you what, I've been here and watched your average office workers on a happy hour in suits and ties sidled up to the bar and enjoying a nice pint, because the beer that True makes here really tends to the sessionable and drinkable side, in an interesting juxtaposition of visuals and beer. True was recently named one of our editor's picks beers of the year for their brain transplant collaboration with Cerebral Brewing, a nice mixed fermentation beer. In addition to sessionable beers, Nick and company brew in their Acid Temple facility a whole range of wild and sour beers, and have just embarked on a spontaneous program. We're really excited to welcome Nick Nunns to the podcast.
Yeah.
Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Jamie.
So what's happening in your brewing world these days?
Oh, man.
2 weeks ago, you dropped off a bottle of Wavering Radiant, your first year spontaneous ale.
Yeah.
So you're jumping into the spontaneous fermentation game now.
Well, we've been doing them. I mean, obviously there are things that take a little while, right? So we got our cool ship, if you want to call it that. It's really just a big open fermenter. Got it last year, early on in the winter, and had originally we bought it from Called Arms here in town, and originally they had intended to use it as an open fermenter, and we got it from them because they needed the space in their tap room. They needed to actually blow out their open fermentation room to make more seating space in their tap room. So they asked us if we could hold on to it, and then we were like, yeah, sure, can we use it? And they were like, go ahead, that's fine with us. And then I looked at it and was like, hey, Zach, that thing kind of looks like a cool ship, doesn't it? And literally a week later, he had brewed his first spontaneous beer using that thing as a cool ship. And then we just decided to buy it outright from the Called Arms guys. So,
did you turbid mash it and everything?
He did the whole process. So the cool thing about the way we're approaching the spontaneous program, or I should say Zach is, he's really heading the whole thing up, is we're not hedging our bets on one side of the political or religious fence or the other. We're doing a lot of really interesting traditional methodology, the typical turbid mashes, all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, we're also trying out some new things and seeing what we can do as American brewers to bring that American innovation to the spontaneous beer domain, as it were. So the Wavering Radiant was a non-traditional beer using totally non-traditional techniques. I don't recall if it used a turbid mash. I don't believe it did. I think what we used for that one was some custom-made malts instead. We did use aged hops in that, which I think really gives it that sort of lambic flavor profile, or lambic-esque flavor profile.
Lambic style.
Yeah, exactly.
Lambic inspired.
It's definitely lambic inspired. Everything we're doing as far as spontaneous will be lambic inspired, but whether or not we start putting stamps on our bottles or not is kind of undecided. Zach actually penned a really nice essay that he put up on our blog about his feelings personally about the whole method traditionnel and what that means for us as kind of a willful dissonant voice to the mainstream and undercurrent of what's going on out there. So,
calling it a mainstream or an undercurrent makes it sound so much bigger than it actually is, because even among those that are proponents of method traditional and focusing on this service mark that implies a particular historical inspired methodology, kind of overshadows the fact that, this is just the smallest fraction of a tiny part of the smallest edge of craft beer.
Right now. If you look at the number of breweries that are installing cool ships or have installed cool ships within the past year, it's huge. In places where you would never think someone could actually, do it correctly based on the climate of their region.
Right.
But I think it's a good thing that Jeff and company are getting ahead of it and trying to create this discussion and just have the dialogue, basically, because moving forward there's going to be so many more people doing spontaneous beer that we need to have that groundwork laid down. So I have the utmost respect for Jeff at Jester King and just everything he's done to try to get that base work done and get the groundwork done ahead of time.
Well, and I think that what he did there was came from an honest place and a sympathetic place, especially with for the Belgian lambic makers, because at the same time this is taking off, there are quite a few people brewing these beers or brewing beers and calling them these things, calling them lambic and calling them goose, who are not anywhere close to the historical,
barely approximating it in some cases.
Right. They're pitching cultures, and and there is something to be said, I think, for if you're going to call a beer that, for doing it that way.
I think sour beer. So we were lucky enough to host the inaugural meeting of the Sour and Wild Ale Guild that is being tried. That folks are trying to assemble right now. That stems from a panel at CBC all about just talking about sour beer, right? Sour beer is one of these things where it's so underrepresented as far as the lexicon that surrounds it. There's not enough words, there's not enough terminology surrounding sour beer as a whole. So for Jeff to at least be starting a discussion on that end, while Swag is also trying to continue to generate that lexicon and try to come up with the terminology that's appropriate, that differentiates these different processes that we all use. I think it's hugely important,
No, I absolutely agree. And I think the key there is that these are, the way that we refer to these things is the way that breweries sell beer. That we can talk about styles and we can talk about appellations and we can talk about names like lambic and goose, but at the end of the day, these we use these kind of reductive terms that are always imperfect in their meaning and tend to have some shift in that meaning over time, but we use them to sell beer.
Well, and
there's an expectation, because you call it that, you are calling it that in order to sell beer to somebody who wants that kind of thing, and there should be some integrity at a broader sense, within the industry as to what that means, and that if people use those terms, that it really means what they're saying.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really about selling it, right? So calling something a sour inherently means more dollar signs. No, that's definitely not the case, right? We've moved from kettle sours to kettle soured barrel-aged beers to mixed culture barrel-aged beers, mixed culture stainless beers. We've done arguably, and now with the spontaneous program, you could say we've done all of the broadest categories of sour beer, in big broad quotes. And not all of them should cost the same amount of money. We never upcharged our gozas just because they were sour. We never tried to get too gougy with kettle soured barrel aged beers because they were time intensive, but they weren't necessarily as time intensive as some of the mixed culture program beers that we've done now. And even with our spontaneous beer, we're not trying to get gougy with that just because of methodology, because at the end of the day, it's been parked in our warehouse just about as long as some other projects that we've worked on that, the cost of goods on was, about the same, if not lower. So
you didn't have to pay for yeast. I mean, come on, man.
That's a big one for us, especially being here in our tap room where we don't brew often enough here with our clean side of stuff to actually harvest and repitch yeast fairly well, you know? So Yeah, it was a pretty significant cost savings for us. But yeah, we're not gonna, just because something is lambic inspired doesn't mean it should garner a higher price point.
With this issue over method traditionality, I thought one of the more interesting pieces that happened was that the disagreements were happening between folks who, really at the root of it, are good friends. That some of the disagreements between Jeff and Trevor and you. I mean, you've done your own collaborations with Jester King.
This is two brewers walking to a bar.
Of course,
it's like
right.
It might as well be a pope and a rabbi or something like that. It's the same idea where it's like these people all are peaceful, wonderful people that just want to have an engaging discussion about these things.
Right.
I know that Trevor and Jeff are not like, blood, out for each other's blood or anything like that.
No.
I know both of them. They're great people.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're just having these very intense discussions about differing views on things. And I think that because it's the internet, or it's based in the internet, it becomes combative, right? That's just how everybody thinks of things.
Yeah, the era of social media has meant that this conversation happens out in the wild, where everyone can watch it happen and also may not understand the context that it's happening in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like people don't consider things to be discussions anymore. Everything's just an argument all the time. Whereas no, that's not what's happening here. This is a debate of sorts. It is a discussion of like two opposing worldviews. It doesn't mean that these guys hate each other. It doesn't mean that anybody's maybe a couple of phrases could have been remade in either statements to lessen the potential for it being construed as an willful argument. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to have a discussion, and unfortunately, it's happening in a public forum where every troll under the sun can weigh in with their viewpoint as well.
Sure. But ultimately, they'll hug it out.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
Move forward and have a beer together.
Yep, totally.
And that'll be that.
Totally.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. We're drinking a Pilsner brewed here. And if you look at your tap list, it's split half and half with your wild and spontaneous and mixed culture beers on one side. And then, pretty much an entire lineup of very sessionable beers on the other. What was your intention with that kind of mix as you launched this brewery? Obviously, as I said in the intro, a lot of extreme visuals going on, and this focus on your love of metal would seem to be somewhat at odds at how focused your beer is on sessionable and drinkable beers. I mean,
sessionability has always been a goal from the outset. I am to be perfectly blunt, I'm the child of an alcoholic. As such, I don't really like being drunk. I am not a huge fan of being inebriated. As such, but I still like to drink a lot of beer, right? So as such, we decided to start making sessionable beer just because I want to drink a lot, but I don't necessarily want to get shit-faced. So that was always a really big goal for us, is being able to have some crushable beer that you can actually sit there and session on top of the alcoholic thing. I'm also from British lineage, so of course I love session beer just by blood.
Sure.
So yeah, it's kind of a combination of those two things. And then I think to put it in a broader stroke as well, there is the whole idea of the cognitive dissonance that we supply here, where you think a heavy metal brewery is going to make big burly imperial stouts and triple IPAs and stuff like that. But we throw you a curveball and do the complete opposite and make these delicate, balanced, nuanced saisons and pilsners and IPAs that aren't necessarily like over the top. Even our imperial stout that we just released this past weekend is, people think it's not sickly sweet enough. It's not thick and robust enough. And it's like, no, that's called it's a drinkable beer. It's 10% alcohol, but it's drinkable. That's the whole goal of that beer. So, you guys may think we fucked up, but in reality, we kind of decided to make a beer that was a little bit more drinkable than some other imperial stouts out there. So,
well, there's that constant challenge as a brewer to balance what the market wants versus what your personality and identity is as a brewery. Imagine you're coming up against that as you move into pastry stout world.
Yeah. Brewing with intention is really difficult when everybody's anticipation is so ubiquitous, or there's a ubiquity to the anticipated style, right? Everybody thinks that an imperial stout this day should be a super sickly sweet, doughy imperial stout, super flabby, you can only really have 3 ounces of it before you're just like, I don't want to drink any more of this.
Bottle share beer.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's a tough balance to try to, be brewers who have specific goals in mind about how our beer should be made, and then to balance that against what the consumer expectation is going to be, for sure.
That's an interesting challenge. How do your drinkers respond to that? I imagine the folks, there are probably several different kinds of people that come out for that kind of beer. One, the kind that's solely chasing the hype and sees you've got some new thing with whatever in crowlers, and now they can come and stand in line and try to trade for it. And and then there are your regulars who understand what you're trying to do with with your flavors and might appreciate that more understated approach.
We're really fortunate to have a reach that goes into all of those different domains. So we have these regulars that are here, 2 or 3 times a week, where we should have like a plaque in the bar, or a bar stool with their name on it or something like that. And guys who will just come here and just crush beers, because it's just, our consumer base is so all over the map. It's insane. We'll get regulars who are regulars because of the beer. We get regulars who are regulars because of the metal. Either one of them may get into the other side of the equation, depending on which side they were on to begin with. We get the ISOers who only come in here for releases.
The ISOers.
ISOers, yeah.
Okay.
And then we get the the hunters who are also regulars. So we get people who line up, and maybe they've never even had an Imperial Stout, but they line up for this Imperial Stout because they know it's going to be limited, and there's just such super fans that they want to participate in that, and they want to get their hands on it. But it's not because it's something they're going to trade. It's because they actually are diehard fans of what we're doing. And those people are like, all of them are great because they are all supporting us as a business. The ones who are into it whole hog, into everything about us, who are here all the time and also line up for all these releases and stuff, those are the ones that are like, fuck yeah, you guys are who we're trying to like reach out to,
Yeah.
So,
what do you do to take care of them?
our bar staff is pretty good about taking care of the regulars, I think. I kind of turn a blind eye to some of the discounting they might do, or hooking them up with pints here or there, because I know at the end of the day that goodwill goes a long way to ensuring that those people are the diehard regulars that they are. So
speaking of the taproom, how big of a percentage of your business is your direct sales out of your taproom?
Our own premise is probably about 75% of our whole business.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, we're wholesaling into a large number of states right now, with a lot of these mixed culture beers, but we crush it here at the tap room, which is so awesome. And I can't envision this business doing as well as it does without having our own tap room to create this environment and sort of like selectively decide how we're going to present ourselves to people.
It is a unique statement for the beer brand and the company as a whole.
There's no corrugated metal. There's no beetle kill. Yeah, I like to be, again, it's cognitive dissonance, right? You think you're going to come into a tap room and it's this place doesn't look like every other tap room. I never wanted to be just another tap room in town. I wanted to be the one that people are either like, oh, fuck yeah, this place is weird and cool and I love it, or they're like, it's scary, I'm going to go now, which it's really not that scary to most people, but we get a handful of the ones who, take 2 steps in and peel out pretty quick.
I was in here a couple years ago and just saw, it was, lunchtime, or maybe it was an early afternoon when you just opened. There were, 2 women in professional attire, well made up, looked perfectly normal.
Yep.
Sitting at the bar, nice loud metal soundtrack. They were enjoying the beer, were just unperturbed.
We don't. Everybody will make friends of mine who are professionals who have desk jobs will joke to me about how they'll come in their work clothes and feel super out of place. None of my bar staff are looking at what people are wearing. They don't care. They really, we don't.
As long as they're
care.
metal on the inside.
As long as they want to order a couple of beers and keep to themselves, or just be mellow. That's all we're looking for. Is we're here doing our thing.
Yeah.
And if people want to come in here and appreciate what we're trying to do here, they are welcome to come and do that, regardless of what they're wearing, you know, what their political views are, what they do for a desk job, what their avenue of life is. Like, we don't care. We really just don't care about that stuff.
But from a business owner perspective, you know, putting money into a business, launching this, getting it off the ground, doing it with a look and a brand that some may find polarizing, that's a risk.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But we're in a, you know, metro area of 3.5 million people or whatever it is, you know, and it's like, I knew that we would have enough people around here who were into it that it wouldn't be a big deal. You know, if the people from, you know, if the suburbanites, to, you know, generally classify it, who may not agree with how we present ourselves, don't like what we're doing, they don't have to come here. That's fine. There are plenty of other breweries that they can go to where they can get the experience they're looking for. We chose to make ourselves a different experience and present a different experience. And as such, we have latched onto a totally different subset of people who want to come in here. And those people are diehard fans as a result of that.
It's an interesting concept, and I think it's one that, you know, as we watch business and capitalism and everything develop today, you know, the old adage of, you know, being something for everybody, and that kind of brewery approach, and making sure you have a brown ale, and, you know, for that kind of drinker, and you have a stout for that drinker, and an IPA for that drinker. And
if you have 60 or 70 breweries in a city, and they're all doing something for everybody, how the fuck do you stand out? How do you become the brewery that people actually want to go to, right? If everybody here, every 70 fucking breweries here in Denver do the exact same thing, how do you get any fans? You know, how do you get people latched onto what you're doing? You're not I don't want to use the word necessarily polarizing, but like, if you're not different enough, you're just the same as everybody else. And there's no reason anybody shouldn't just jump around and not be loyal to you as a business at all.
I think that's a good point. I'd rather have enough people love me than everybody just kind of like me.
Yeah.
You know? Exactly. That, you know, again, in a market with 70 breweries, having a lukewarm reception where they don't hate you, but, you know, they just have a average opinion of you, doesn't tend to drive people to actually go out and drink the beer. No. But having the balls to go all in on something and make it special for a smaller number of people who fucking love it, you know, that, again, it's a riskier proposition, but it's...
I think it's not nearly as risky as just being the ubiquitous, you know, same-ish brewery. Mm-hmm. We've already had, like, a bunch of them shut down or, you know, sell off to somebody else who's just going to set up another brewery that seems same-ish to me, and it's just like... what are we doing to better the whole industry if we're doing that? You know, if everybody's just doing the same thing, then there's no, like, I don't know. You need counterculture to push things forward, and that's what we present here, is the counterculture, you know? So it's the counterculture to what beer was supposed to be, the counterculture, but everybody's using the same terminology, the same verbiage, the same lexicon. So we're the counterculture to the counterculture, I guess, you know? In a weird way.
I would drink to that, but my glass is empty, Nick. I think we might need a refill. All right, we're back with new beers in hand. We've got Glasses of Life's Trade, your mixed fermentation light farmhouse ale, 4.7%, lightly fruity, nice restrained acidity. In a day when most folks that say sour saison really beat you over the head with sour, let's talk about how subtle this one is.
I think that's one of our biggest goals, is, you know, we don't like bracing acidity. And I think that you're seeing something of a paradigm shift in the whole sour industry as a whole, where it seems like a lot of people are trying to get away from that, which is great. I really love the fact that, like, everybody's kind of trying to steer away from the, like, what's your most sour, and over towards, like, what do you have that has a little bit more, you know, balance or nuance to it and is a little bit more controlled in terms of the acidity, instead of just letting that lacto just, like, go totally rampant.
You talk to those lambic makers, they don't make sour beer.
No, definitely not. Exactly, right? So it's like classic American style. We went, we went way over the top with sourness. And now I think as a whole, as far as the brewers go anyway, you're definitely seeing a lot of them try to pull that back and make some more restrained beers.
What are, don't need to get too technical on that, but what are some of the ways that you do that?
Zach talks to our yeast a lot.
Okay.
We all think he's crazy. He kind of is in a really great way. We use a lot of different things. He'll be able to sense based on where a batch is going as the fermentation progresses, what's happening with that maybe particular instance of the mixed culture. So we have a house culture that we use for a lot of our fermentations. It's a blend of a bunch of different stuff, and Zach spent like 2 years pulling all these different microbes together and like selectively breeding this by picking barrels that he liked and adding that into the culture and just continuing to celera it up from there. But as a result of spending so much time building it up, he knows what the fermentation like curve looks like, so he can take a batch that maybe went overly sour and know that on the next one he might have to up the hopping rate a little bit to beat that lacto back down into submission a little bit, and just kind of tailor the recipes towards making sure that the culture is happy and doing what we want it to do.
Yeah,
it's a big hopping rate thing for sure. And then knowing that maybe when one particular tank has some of the culture that's gone way out of hand, knowing that okay, it's not harvest from that one. We got a bunch of other ones over here that are doing just fine. We can harvest from those ones instead.
Do you find something to do with that beer, or what's the general outcome of that?
Sometimes
when it gets too acidic.
Sure. Yeah, we'll do a lot of blending. Mm-hmm. We'll take particular beers that are less acidic and blend them. In a thing like a Life's Trade, we might have 4 or 5 consecutive batches going all at once. If one gets overly sour, we know we can use a little bit of that one to either punch up one that's not sour enough, or we can use one that's not sour enough to punch down, just blend them to order and get that acidity that we actually really want.
Right.
It's one of the nicest things about doing mixed culture beer is that it's always usable as long as your blending chops are up. And Zach's blending chops are really, really good.
Now, there's points if you're getting into ethyl acetate or other flavors that are really just unpleasant. That
we'll just get rid of it.
It just goes. Yeah. But no, that acid beer is certainly something that doesn't have to go to waste, even if it's not exactly what you'd want to release as its own beer.
Yeah, exactly. So we will as long as it's not going too acidic or getting too much ethyl acetate or any of the flavors that we don't want in the beer, as long as it doesn't get totally out of whack, we can always use it for something else, which is great. So we do dump a lot of beer, but we also, despite maybe brewing a recipe for one intended purpose, will be able to steer it back into being usable for something else.
Sure. Let's rewind a little bit to a conversation we were having. You mentioned that taproom is 3/4 of your company revenue. But one of the things you did over the last year was actually launch a distribution arm to go along with the brewery.
That was actually 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, GABF.
Seems like just yesterday.
Yeah, no kidding. Time flies when you're drinking too much beer.
So, for a small brewery with a bunch of metalheads who, has a thing for sour beer and, is mostly a taproom business, that seems like a crazy move to bite off, getting into a rather competitive, thinner margin, logistics-based business like distribution. What's the impetus there? And, why would a small craft brewer want to get into that game?
The real reason we're doing distro in the first place was thanks to Burial. They're really the impetus behind the whole thing. We did collaborations with them.
Burial Brewing out of Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah, exactly. So we did some collaborations with them and then wanted to put their beer on tap, and I wanted to figure out how I could make that happen, and found out that as long as I get my importer's license and act as their wholesaler, we can put their beer on tap here. And I was like, okay, so we'll do that. And we told Burial, sell us some you guys are going to come up for GABF. You're probably going to want to do some events. Send us a whole pallet of something, and we can just sell it around town for you. And we did it, and it worked great. And we did the same thing for the Commons, actually, because we wanted to get some of their beer out here as well. So that was kind of like the proof of concept, was we got the license, got it all ratcheted down, got everything set up, and then, got the beer on trucks out here and shotgunned it across Denver, and it disappeared in a couple of days. And then from that, started talking to other breweries as we've traveled across the country about whether or not they're coming out for GABF, and asked if they would maybe want to do some collaborative events with us while they're out here. And a lot of them were pretty pumped at that opportunity, to work with a brewer instead of working with some faceless distributor is much less of an emotional hurdle for a lot of people, a lot of brewers. So, there's a inherent level of trust that we all have in one another, and they're happy with that, and we can provide to them the service that they need to get their beer out here.
It seems like the existence of the Great American Beer Festival itself has indelibly impacted even the distribution business in the state of Colorado, and that Crooked Stave on the same side is also have their distribution arm, probably a little bit larger than your your distribution arm.
We actually we talk to people that are sometimes fairly big who are like, can you do our distro for us? And we're like, no, like you're talking about sending like a truckload, like you should go talk to CSA or Elite or somebody else here who's like really big. We'll take a couple of skids off of a brewery here or there, but talking about like 10 to 20 skids is a different story. So it's just, we know where our sweet spot is, we know where we want to be, and we're never disappointed to throw business at some of the other great wholesalers that are here in Colorado. So
yeah, but at the very core of it, that whole idea of distribution that way, of this kind of short burst distribution around special events, or getting a truck every now and then selling it out through whatever reps directly to retailers. Like, this is a dramatic change for the beer industry. Like, this is not the way that the beer industry is ever used to doing it. These are not core SKUs and rotating seasonals. This is not this specific space on the shelf. I mean, this is, I don't know, maybe this month we need this much space and next month we don't need that much space. I mean, that's got to be madness for a lot of retailers out there.
I think it can be. We certainly see, one of the things we run into here in Colorado is that I find that the Colorado beer market is fairly insular, and that can be a good and a bad thing. I don't ascribe it to either side necessarily, right? There are pros and cons just like anything else. One of the pros is that we have a really great loyal market where people buy a shit ton of Colorado beer. If you're here, you're buying Colorado beer, you're buying Denver beer, you're buying beer that's local to you. So when we bring in something from Tampa or Virginia or somewhere else across the country, Queens, people here may or may not even know about this brewery. We have had their beer traveling around to other parts of the world and like trying some of these like shining stars of the industry right now that are like blowing it up on the East Coast, and you bring them out here and people are just like, who? I've never heard of any of these breweries. So there's definitely an uphill battle for us as far as like educating the consumers here in Colorado about like some of the amazing shit that's happening outside of Colorado. But again, like on the other side of that coin, people here in Colorado are super stoked about Colorado beer. So it's a weird position for us to be in for sure.
So from your view, we've talked about the viewpoint of folks within our square state of Colorado and then the viewpoint outside. How do those things differ?
It's hard to say. It seems to me like I'm baffled that you're still seeing breweries in Colorado who are making fun of hazy IPA. I'm blown away by that. It's like, this is a legitimate style literally everywhere else I go, where nobody's like, railing on it or putting up social media posts that are like, just kidding, we're not making, hazy IPA, it's clear as hell. It's almost like the brewing industry here is so long-standing that we have these like religious zealots about how breweries should act and how the brewing industry should be, whereas when you go anywhere else in the country where it may not have been quite as long-standing an industry, you see a little bit more you see more flexibility outside Colorado than you do inside Colorado, I think.
I think that's an interesting one, and I know the incident on social media. The one that
I love those guys too. So
I know.
We can pick it out.
We all
who
do.
we're talking about. I love them.
And I thought it was funny.
It certainly gets you a chuckle, but at the same time, it's like, guys, like, that like this shit is blowing up. There are like, look at other half. They're printing fucking money out of an ATM. selling this shit, and you're sitting here struggling to like sell your, clear stuff. It's like, man, pay attention. Just pay attention to what's happening in this industry and be flexible enough to like know that, despite you doing this for 20 years, guess what? It's always going to fucking change in some way or another.
And I think the level of the criticism, coating yourself in flour and implying somebody is not using honest brewing methods to achieve something, that I think is the unfortunate part of that critique. It's one thing to have a little bit of fun, but that subtext that you're a disingenuous brewer, that's not something that any fellow brewer is going to accept, especially those in this state who are brewing hazy IPAs and out of this state who are going to great scientific lengths to figure out how to do it well.
Yep.
To make sure their beers have no yeast in them, because if there is yeast in them, then it's going to, that haze is going to precipitate out, and that's not what they want.
Right.
They're centrifuging beers. They're looking for that kind of haze stability, and they're using all the tools the brewers have always used. Absolutely. In hazy beers like Hefeweizen to achieve that kind of stability.
So here's the anecdote. I was in Boston for a festival out there, and me, Zach, my head brewer, and Kat, my sales manager, were all sitting at a bar, and we had 3 beers in front of us. My beer was fresh from Civil Society, who have since become really great friends of ours. Zach was drinking the same thing as me, and Kat's beer looked identical, but was presented in a different glass. So I asked her what she had, and she said, I ordered a Hef. And when I saw that the level of turbidity was the same in all 3 of those beers, I was like, yeah, why are we even having a discussion about this? Why is it okay for that beer to have that level of haze, but this one not? Like, this is ridiculous. This is not even a discussion we should be having. So
sure, no, and I've talked to plenty of brewers of hazy IPAs, and they're looking at the same kind of strategies, step mashing and whatnot, in order to kind of lock in a certain amount of haze, and realistically, that does impact flavor. It's I think, like you said earlier, it's a valid style. Simply making fun of other people for brewing it seems to be a lot of character for the community of brewers. But
yeah, and it's short-sighted, because if this thing, if you're gonna stand up on your high horse and you're gonna talk about how you don't like those styles of beers, but 20 years from now everybody's making them, and all of a sudden you decide to make one too, like, you're just gonna look back on yourself and be like, well, that was dumb. I don't know why we were complaining about this. Or you might have that same come to Jesus moment I had, where you're just like, there's that snap of recognition of like, why am I even complaining about this? So it's like, just be open. Be open to new ideas. Be open to new concepts. Just be like, take in the universe and like, just see what's out there.
I would love to taste a hazy IPA from those guys. And do you have anything hazy IPA wise on tap, Nick?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Because
I'm just about out of this beer.
Yeah, I like drinking those beers a lot. So we decided to make one, and I think we do. The cool thing about it is we're always going to do, we'll try to keep up with what's contemporarily happening, but we're always going to put our spin on it. So even our hazy IPA is not like, it's not super sweet. It probably finishes at like 2 Plato, like most of our other beers, so it's fairly dry and drinkable still, but it still has the aromatics that you're looking for in that style of beer. So we took that thing and said, here's what we like about it, here's what we don't like about it, and selectively made our recipe and brewed the beer the way we fucking want that beer to taste, So, sure, it may not be exactly like everybody else's hazy IPA, but guess what? It's not everybody else's hazy IPA, it's our hazy IPA, and we made it the way we want to make it.
Fuck yeah. Now we're back. I've got some hazy IPA in hand. Cheers, Nick.
Cheers.
So tell me what you're doing here. You're right, it's not quite as sweet, as some other hazy IPAs, but certainly not out of the similar realm.
I don't think so. I think it's really, we're using the same yeast as everybody else is, but we're not necessarily.
So London L3.
Yeah. So, we get it from we're lucky enough to have a local yeast supplier. I'm sure it's London 3. He just calls it, Northeast IPA yeast or whatever.
Right.
But I'm sure it's just London 3.
Who's your local yeast brother?
Inland Island. They're awesome. It's so cool to have. A big part of what we do is try to work as much as we can with local producers. Zach has been really adamant about trying to change the producer supplier chain as much as we can, so that we can, kind of not just work with these big guys that are just like, here's our menu of shit, just order what you need and figure it out. It's more like we can go to our maltster and be like, we want this, and they will be like, fuck yeah, we will make that for you. Or we can go to our yeast supplier and be like, we want a blend of this, this, and this, and they will be like, absolutely, we will do that for you. So, we can go to our farmer that we work with out on the Western Slope and say, we would like to see these fruits, and he will be like, that sounds great to me too. I will get it in the ground next year for you guys. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do, is like change that relationship and try to make it a thing where we can, basically source what we want the way we want it to be sourced, and support a lot of these smaller businesses that are, similarly sized to us, just doing different stuff.
So, from a brewer perspective, how do you get to that point where you can articulate, say, what you specifically want in a malt, and then talk to a local maltster and be able to convey in some meaningful way what that is? You're thinking, I would look at it almost like trying to paint a picture with pigments that you don't have yet. But conceiving of that could be a little. It's you don't have a framework necessarily to even think about it with.
Yeah, but I think that's what it means to be a forward-thinking person in general, right? Is like, if you don't have the tools to do what you want to do, you figure out how to either make or get those tools in hand. So of any art form, of any form, most people will have some sort of desired result, or at least kind of have an idea of where they want to steer a concept. And Zach is really good at that. He knows what he wants the end result to be and can back end it and say, like, I know I want this. How do I get there? If I don't have the materials or things I need to do that, how can I still accomplish that goal? And a lot of what we do is try to work with the people who are giving us the ingredients for what we do, and trying to tweak those things to get the results that we want. So it's really just being, thoughtful and forward-thinking and progressive in a way.
But you're also at some point at that, taking a risk, because you think that what you're asking for is going to get you there, but it may not.
Haven't we been talking about how we take risks this whole time, pretty much? That's a big part of what we're doing. Everything.
It's true.
It's the same way we took a risk with what the ethos of this whole brewery is. If you're not taking risks, you're just being a same-ish brewery and doing the same thing everybody else is doing. And it's really easy to make an IPA, with the same base malts, the same everything. It's the same. It's convenient to do it that way. It may not necessarily set you apart at all. So what do you do to change what you're doing in order to set yourself apart from the rest of the pack,
Are there some specific projects that you're particularly proud of working with, some local folks to, to basically, create your own raw ingredients so that you could create the beer that you wanted to create?
I think we've done some cool... There's a couple of examples. I'll give you the weirdest one. Zach got a hair about making raw ales. So I don't know any other brewery that's doing this regularly or had done it before us. I'm sure some other people have.
And by raw ale, you mean unboiled.
So yeah, the process was, if we want to get as technical as I can get about it.
Go for it.
It is a specialized mash regimen specifically designed by Zach to make sure that we are, to the best of our abilities, driving off any weird precursors that we don't want in the beer for off flavors or anything like that. That gets mashed, run into the kettle, not boiled, hopped, and then basically heated to sterilization temperature, but not fully boiled, and then just run out and fermented in a variety of, whether it be stainless or oak or what have you. It's a weird beer, but the idea behind the beer was to give you as unadulterated a grain flavor as you possibly can get. Right? Everybody wants to talk about hops all the time. We wanted to make a beer that was all about malt and all about giving you the purest representation of malt character that we can possibly give you. So that was basically making wort that gets fermented without getting boiled. So one of the raw ales we did was with a Egyptian purple barley. It was an heirloom varietal that Zach was able to procure from Troubadour Maltings, and we wouldn't have been able to get it from anybody else. It was a sort of thing where, Chris Schooley over there at Troubadour was like, I have come across this weird thing. Do you guys think you can use it for something? And we were like, fuck yeah, we'll figure out something to do with that. That sounds really cool, And it did contribute like a purple flavor, purple color to the beer, So it was this cool thing that he presented to us that like we would have never got that from any of our bigger malt suppliers, because they're looking at like, what can we sell to everybody everywhere? Whereas Chris is like, I got this weirdo fucking metal brewery over here that's doing all kinds of goofy mixed culture stuff. What can I possibly give them that's different? And he's interested in reviving some of these grains, or just providing us with something that differentiates him as a supplier and helps us differentiate ourselves as a brewery as well. So that would have never happened if we didn't have a really tight-knit relationship with a very small provider of one of our raw materials.
No, I think the other condition that also supports that is having an audience that is willing to pay some sort of premium for craft beer and from you, because certainly working with a craft maltster like that to produce some special purple malt, you're going to pay per pound probably at least twice, maybe 4 times as much as you might pay for that same commercial malt from a larger maltster that's producing it at just a massive scale.
Sure.
And that's, while malt is not the most expensive ingredient in beer, that still amounts to a rather significant increase, one that you can afford to do as long as people are willing to pay what they pay for craft beer.
We did not sell that beer for an exorbitant price. The thing that offsets it for us as a business is coming back to the fact that we do 70% of our revenue here at the tap room.
Yeah.
Right? If you're a New Belgium, an Odell, an Avery of the world, you're much more concerned with what is digestible by the masses, right?
Sure.
We're already weird enough over here. What's making a weird beer really going to do for us? That's going to be a detriment, right? Even if we eat shit on a batch of beer, if we sell a couple of kegs of something, we've already offset all of our costs, and everything after that is really gravy, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I think we can take those gambles because we're doing so much business here at our tap room. That's a big part of it.
But then the other piece of it is that's also a lot of time for you and for the brewer and for Zach. That working directly with a craft maltster like that means a lot of back and forth and a lot of communication, and there's a lot of mind share and opportunity cost in doing something like that, huh?
Yeah. What else are we gonna do?
Fair enough.
Zach is one of the busiest people I know. He's already doing a band, going on tour for like a third of the year at this point. Damn. It seems like, and still somehow manages to come up with these concepts and execute them. And actually keep these relationships going with all of these suppliers, as well as like managing all of his employees in the brew house. So I don't know how he does it, but he makes it work somehow.
So your cool ship schedule revolves around the tour
Chemist
schedule?
Is on tour, yeah.
That's awesome. I saw a Denver Westward article this week which mentioned there are 16 more breweries in Denver looking to open up in 2018.
Highly contest that number.
Do you?
Yeah, because like 3 of them were slated to open this year.
Yeah.
So they were already carryovers from the current year. Some of them are actually breweries that are just changing hands and rebranding. So that doesn't count either, right? So I don't know. I think that number's a little exaggerated, but
we could, I think it does raise that question of how much is too much. At what point does craft beer? And when I say that, when we started this magazine back in 2013 and put out our first issue in early 2014, I started looking at the statistics, and the numbers were, even at that point, everyone was screaming, "Oh, this is a bubble. Oh, craft beer can't sustain this. There's too many breweries." But when you looked at it, there were still 10 breweries per million people, and Belgium had like 12 per million people. Germany had 16 breweries per million people because a lot more breweries are local and serve a smaller kind of on-premise audience. And, we were nowhere close to that. I mean, we were so far away from that in the United States that it just wasn't an issue. And then 2 years ago, I went back and revisited it, and we were at 13 breweries per million people. And just earlier this week, I went back and looked at the same numbers, same stats again, now that we've hit 6,000 breweries in the United States. It's interesting, that first year we were at 2,500 breweries and thought, holy shit, what are we doing here?
Yeah, no kidding.
Now we're at 6,000. But we finally hit that number. We're now at 18 breweries per million people in the United States. And the question is becoming more realistic of how much is too much, and at what point are these businesses not adding something to the overall craft beer community?
Landscape, yeah.
Craft beer as it grew was fantastic, especially when new breweries opened up in new places and turned new customers on to craft beer. And in that way, I'm not a supply side economics fan by any stretch of the imagination. You can guess at my politics, but having said that, I thought there was something very realistic and true to that kind of supply side, with a lot of craft brewery openings over the last 4 years, where it was able to create more craft beer drinkers. Mm-hmm. That the presence of some of these breweries convinced people to become craft beer fans who might otherwise not be. And I think we're starting to kind of hit the natural limit of that. I would agree.
I think that I think that Denver is a really interesting canary in the coal mine for the industry as a whole, and that if you want to see how weird things can get, look at what's happening here. 2 breweries that are GABF award winners are now splitting a tap room. That's odd. That's strange.
It literally is strange.
It's just.
I'm the editor. I'm supposed to make the puns.
I will try to beat you to that as best I can. Metalheads love puns.
Oh yeah. So do ska fans. And apparently craft beer with hops has just taken that in a whole other direction.
Yeah, no kidding. That's weird to me, right? When you see things like that happening, you're kind of like, uh-oh, that's no bueno. When you see a brewery less than a year after it opens sell to another brewery from out of state so they can open up another brewery here, not even a brewery, a tap room or a beer bar, really, that's a weird thing to me. There's just a lot of weird stuff going on here that I feel like you're going to start seeing some things shake out. So if I was one of the 16 on that list of breweries slated to open in Denver right now, I would either hope that I am doing something very, very impressive or very, very different. Otherwise, they are going to have a very, very hard time.
It's hard to come into a market like this with beer that doesn't impress in some significant way or another, or an experience for the drinkers that doesn't impress in some other way.
I think the experience is the part that a lot of people don't think about. It's really, in such a mature market that we're in, it's not okay just to make really good beer. It's not enough. It is not enough. You have to do something else. You have to have an angle. If you don't have an angle for your tap room or what your brewery represents or what you're doing, nobody is going to give an absolute fuck about what you're doing. It needs to be different. Otherwise, you're going to look just the same as anybody else, and they're going to go to the place that actually wows them in some way or another, whether it be by scaring the pants off them like we apparently do, air quotes, or, creating some sort of culture that people can latch onto. Ratio is crushing it because they have a really strong culture that appeals to a lot of people. They're doing a really good job with that. Crooked Stave has diehard fans that are all about, all of the work that Chad has done to make Brettanomyces-based beers and sour beers the thing that they are here in Colorado. So if you don't have that sort of angle, and another example would be, Bill and Ashley at Bierstadt. They are just crushing it on Pilsner. If you don't have an angle like one of those different sorts of things, why is anybody going to really care about what you're doing?
It's a fair concern. No, we at our brewery accelerator events, which are geared towards those breweries and planning those that are in up to 1 year, who are folks that are getting their breweries off the ground. The boot camp is a lot of convincing people why they shouldn't launch a brewery.
I've tried to get that for 2 years in a row. I tried to get a panel at CBC that was literally that, and I'm pretty sure that the BA was like looking at their big ticker board on the wall of how many breweries are opening every day, and was like, yeah, no, we can't convince people not to open breweries because then we stop making money.
They'll still make plenty of money
They're going to be just fine.
Off of their current membership. They'll be just fine. But our thought on that was that, and Doug Constantiner from Society, when we did the
love that guy.
Yeah, love that guy. He's another metalhead.
It's the best.
We did an opening panel at that accelerator in their brew house in the back there, and Doug was very honest with folks. He's like, you shouldn't do this. Like, let me just be very blatant and honest. You shouldn't open a brewery. That it is something for him, and I loved that his test was, if you can't do anything else in the world, if there is no other thing that you would love more than to operate a brewery, and you are willing to deal with all of the bullshit and headaches that comes along with that, and the sleepless nights, and wondering if you're going to make payroll, and all the other things that are going to crush you and destroy your soul in this process, if you can deal with that, then you have to start a brewery.
Yep.
But I'm going to try to talk you out of it anyway. Yeah. And if I try to talk you out of it and I can't talk you out of it, then
maybe you should be a brewer after all.
Maybe you should be a brewer, but I'm going to do my best to talk you out of it. And I think that's probably a place that most people need to come from today. Like, is there anything else you can do? Could you simply put that $600,000, $800,000, $1 million into a bank, or into a stock portfolio, and drive a nice return off of that, and live comfortably for the rest of your life, rather than going and doing this? If you can, hey, don't start a brewery.
Yeah. That's no fun, though. That's the most passionless way of using $1 million, right?
Probably is.
It's the most sensible way you could do it, but
it's absolutely sensible, unless you have a vision. Unless you have this, as you said, some idea for doing something that is going to change the conversation, add to the community, provide something that beer drinkers haven't really seen yet, or an experience that is outside of the norm, and in some way its own unique, special, artistic, creative, insane thing.
Is that a question?
I don't know. Is it?
Are you just doing your own soliloquy right now?
I'd love to hear myself talk. So this podcast is just an excuse for that.
I have always opened with that piece of advice, that same Constantiner piece of advice. When people ask me for advice on opening a brewery, I tell them not to. My new answer is, if you absolutely have to, get good marketing help. That'll help you stand out so much. If you can position your brand in a really strong way, and you can have very convincing and very strong imagery and a very strong concept behind what you're doing, it will help immensely. If you're going to be just another outdoorsy brewery, you're just going to be that ubiquitous brewery, the same as a bunch of the other outdoorsy breweries. But yeah, I don't know, man. I've led with the don't open a brewery thing a lot. I'm getting kind of tired of telling people that a little bit, but it's still just as relevant as it was, when I started telling people not to open a brewery.
And I don't want to sound critical on this, but I even hate that brand position, and I think the core of it is, don't just position your brand. You just fucking mean something to somebody.
Yeah.
You got to mean something to someone.
Yeah.
What's the reason that somebody's going to love you? What are they going to get from you, and what are you going to give to them that they can't get in some other way?
Yeah.
That value in that relationship, and that meaning that's what people want in life and work and business today.
Sure. It's interesting you bring up value, because I think that brings up an interesting point, which is when you have 70 breweries in a city, does the value get diluted for each extra one, right? When you're that first brewery that opens up in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee, you mean a lot to a lot of people, or maybe not to a lot of people, but to, you could mean everything to everyone in your local community. But when you are Brewery 71, what is the overall, is there a cap? Is there a peak? Are we cannibalizing on the overall value with each additional brewery opening? It almost seems like there is a finite resource of what that value is, and it just gets diluted as more and more breweries, open up. So you just run into this problem of like, I don't know, you're not bringing more to the table. There's nothing left on the table. You're just, there's table scraps at that point, really.
We've gone in a super downer direction on this one.
I know. Can we just wipe that whole part out? Because you're just Debbie Downer right now.
Damn it, Nick. You're like a doom dirge metal. God, we're just
got real sludgy there.
Let's lighten it up a bit. You get out there around the country quite a bit. So who are the bright stars shining around the country right now?
Oh man, who is a bright star?
Just remember everyone, because if you don't mention them, they're going to judge you.
Yeah, no kidding, right? The most recent time I had an unbelievable experience at a brewery was when I was in Portland, Maine, and I had two unbelievable experiences there. Allagash and Oxbow. And that's really cool, right? Because you have two breweries doing conceptually similar beers with about 20 years of difference between the two of them. Allagash, I consider to be the last brewery I will go into and be fanboying out beyond belief about. I don't think I'm ever going to get that experience again. I think maybe if I make my Belgium pilgrimage, I may get that one more time. But I'm pretty convinced it's the last American brewery that I will just be like, I've loved you guys forever, and now that I've finally seen it, I love you even more, So.
What was it about the experience?
It's so unbelievably pure. They are such people of intent at Allagash that it just blows you away with the authenticity of what they're doing. Everybody who works there loves Allagash. Every beer that they make is an Allagash beer through and through. They are just so devoted to what they're doing that you can feel it in your bones, that there's that authenticity and that love and passion for what they're doing, and it just resonated with me so much. It was so impressive. If I could be a brewery with that kind of pedigree 20 years from now, that would be the thing that I would shoot for sure.
I think it comes from the top down, and that Rob has built the business in a way that expresses his love, and Jason Perkins, their brewmaster, embodies every bit of that. Yep. And instills that kind of both discipline and creativity in all of the folks there. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, but it's just unbelievable going to a place like that, and just experiencing it was so good. Having a beer with Rob would be one of my goals for sure. I would love to just sit down and just have that guy talk at me for an hour and just be like, there's so many things I can learn from you. It's amazing.
So how about Oxbow?
We had a really cool experience with those guys. I love their approach to beer. It's very similarly minded to us, where they're doing, these beautifully delicate, nuanced beers, a lot of saisons, doing some just stunning pilsners out there. And then we were lucky enough to actually hang out with their crew. Fava over there took us out and literally took us to an oyster house. We bought oysters out of the tanks and everything like that. He was teaching us on the beach how to shuck oysters and shit, and I was just like, what is even happening to what is my life right now? It was we had just drank all these beautiful pilsners and saisons and everything, then we're on a beach in Maine eating oysters out of the shell. It was so cool, man. Those guys treated us with the most unbelievable amount of hospitality, and just we're so stoked that we were out there and hanging out with them. It was mind-blowing. It was so cool.
Your life sounds pretty good, Nick.
I'm 5 years in. I am finally at the point where I don't feel like every day is a constant struggle. I think that has a lot to do with the people that I have working here. I can not be here, and I can know that everything is going to be going perfect without me. So I attribute everything that I have right now to the wonderful people that work for me. I can't thank them enough.
Fantastic. Nick Nunns, True Brewing, here in the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. Nick, if people want to learn more about True, where do they go?
Does anybody do anything other than Instagram these days?
Instagram, huh?
We're everywhere. Website, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
True Brewing, but the U is not a U, is it?
It is the Roman U, so
Okay.
TRVE.
All right.
If you want to look us up.
Well, Nick, thanks for joining us on the podcast here for Craft Beer and Brewing. I've been your host, Jamie Bogner. Thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed the podcast, subscribe. And if you love the conversation, then also subscribe to our magazine at beerandbrewing.com/subscribe. Thanks, Nick, for joining us. Appreciate the beers. Delicious.
Thanks, man. Appreciate
rock on.
Yeah. Cheers.
If you love brewing as much as we do and are inspired by the work of leading commercial brewers like Mitch Steele of New Realm, Tommy Arthur of Lost Abbey, Matt Brynildson of Firestone Walker, Jeff Stuffings and Avery Swanson of Jester King, Jason Perkins of Allagash, and more, then put one of our 2018 Brewers Retreat events on your calendar. These luxury brewing events at gorgeous resort locations around the country pair great brewers, great food, and intimate camaraderie for a truly unique and unforgettable experience. Learn more at brewersretreat.com. And if you're interested in reaching the thousands of listeners who tune into every episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, we'd love to welcome you as a sponsor. For more information, drop an email to info@beerandbrewing.com, and our media sales team will craft a plan that works for you. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.